Thank you, Will Kurtz in the control room. Welcome to another exciting and healing evening to AHA, a human among humans. I'm Michael Koran, and I am really honored and I think healed just having him around. This is Dr. Ron Goldman, who is director of the Early Trauma Prevention Center. Do I have that right?
Yes,
So you will help prevent early trauma
that's what I do the best.
and maybe even get rid of some of mine, yes? Just your presence?
We'll see how it goes.
We'll see how it goes. So why don't you tell us, I have questions. What is your overview of the American problem of violence? And you think it has a lot to do with early trauma.
I certainly do. First, a few statistics. We are the most violent, highly developed culture in the world.
That's us.
Let's see if we can take a look.
America first.
Okay, there's a graph showing homicides by men per 100,000, and you can see we're way over what other countries, mostly in Europe, are. So actually, we have about 4 times as many homicides by rate per 100,000 as European countries, and over 15 times the homicide rate in Japan. We have about 1 school shooting a week.
Ouch. Is that true now? Oh my Lord.
That's right. Yeah, we don't hear about all of them because
Oh.
there's obviously other news to report.
Oh my Lord.
That's horrible.
Uh.
And
Wow, how do you go to school? It must be so scary to go to school.
well, in some places, certainly after one of these events, it's very traumatic for the children to return.
Oh my. Hi, Ron, get up and go to school. Wow.
Let me also tell you, women are particularly vulnerable to violence. The greatest cause of injury to women is being assaulted by a domestic partner. And this happens to about 1 out of 4 women. Amazing statistic.
Oh, so there's a moral to the story. I'm afraid that. But women don't do that if they live with each other, right?
Not as much as men. No, the large proportion of violence in this culture
Is the man
done
against
by
woman?
men. Yeah. Well, not totally against women, but I'm saying there is a lot of violence of men against women if they're living together. And again, 1 out of 4 is a pretty serious
1 out of
proportion.
4 women
1 out of
living
4
with a
women
man?
will be assaulted at some time during adulthood.
Yeah, my father hit my mother, did he? Or my mother hit my father, I think. One or the other.
Well, what do they say? Don't get me started.
Yeah.
Something like that. Anyway, so our usual response to violence is having more prevention techniques, having more police on the street, better intelligence gathering. These methods are fine, but they have a limited effect.
They're not going to have. So, the violence of men against women is consistent with year after year. It's that 1 out of 4.
Well, it varies from year to year. I mean, there are certain variabilities. It's not going to be constant. It's not
Yeah.
on a straight line plane.
Boy, this is a sad.
But-
But you're going to help prevent it.
We'll
Yes.
see. We'll see.
Yes.
We'll take the data now, and then we'll check it out in a few weeks and
Yes.
see if this program
Oh,
has done
my.
anything.
This is sad,
Yeah.
Ron.
So, okay, so what do? We have this problem of violence, and we tend to approach it with some of these indirect measures, which I just mentioned a couple. We also have, of course, availability of guns. We have violent media.
But the domestic violence isn't necessarily guns.
Of course not. Of
Right.
course not. I'm just saying the big
Right.
picture here.
Is
the
it?
big picture.
No, I understood.
Yeah.
No, I didn't. Wasn't challenging you.
Okay.
In Europe, is it the same domestic violence or not? Or would you know?
No, it's lower.
It's
Again,
lower in Europe.
Domestic violence is less frequent in Europe. Yeah.
Marry a foreigner. Yes, my friend just married a Frenchman.
Or
Oh,
move over there. Yeah.
wow! There's a.
But hey, we are Americans. We live here. Let's do something about our problem rather than avoiding it in certain ways. I understand, but let's see what we can do here. And I got some ideas, and we'll see where they go.
Okay.
Okay, so let's take a look at here in America. Again, as I mentioned, we have contributing factors now: availability of guns, violence in the media, and social problems. Again, just to name a few contributing factors. I suggest that these are secondary factors. And I'm here primarily to talk about primary factors that get to the root of the problem.
And it doesn't matter even what you. I mean, what you're calling primary
Yeah.
is helpful regardless of what we call it. It doesn't
Sure.
have to be primary.
Sure.
It could
Sure.
be equal
Yeah.
opportunity contributors.
Yeah. Okay. So let's take some attention here on what I'm calling primary factors and see where that leads us. So there are various contributing factors to what I call primary factors. I'll give you an example here: repressed anger. I think we can appreciate that having repressed anger is a primary factor that can lead to violent behavior, and that violent behavior can get triggered by the secondary factors. Okay, so again, if we deal with the secondary factors, we're not necessarily getting to the primary factor. What's going on with this repressed anger? What's the origin of that? So I can talk a little bit.
Yes, I'm an expert on repressed anger.
Okay, so I'd like to get into some research that's relevant here. Back in the 1950s, a couple of researchers named Harry and Margaret Harlow did an experiment in their animal laboratory. And what they did was they had a monkey colony. And this research is in a lot of psychology textbooks. What they did was they separated monkey infants from their mothers after birth and put these infants in separate cages. Now let's see if we can get a picture of that. There we go. Okay, so here's an image of a monkey infant in a separate cage with this so-called substitute mother.
It's not a real mother either, right?
Of course not. Of
Right.
course not. Because the experiment here is to separate the newborn infants from the mothers and see what happens, see what develops. And a very interesting thing happened, that over a period of time, these monkey infants developed aggressive and violent behaviors. And this behavior, this aggressive behavior, was exhibited toward normally behaving monkeys, okay? So again, this is a change in behavior on the part of the infants that were separated from the mothers. And then if those monkey infants, as they got older, if they became parents of offspring, then they exhibited some of their aggressive behavior on their own offspring. And then the offspring, as they developed aggressive and violent behavior.
Oh, even though they weren't separated from their mother.
Well, no, the separation is in the early
It's
stage.
just in the.
It's in the early stage of development.
No, but if I understood you, there's the separated monkeys.
The newborn infants now.
Yes.
Yep.
Then get married eventually, right?
When they were older and when they joined them with other monkeys, then they could
Make
have
children.
mates. Yeah.
Make children. We
Right.
don't need to. This is a very sophisticated audience in Cambridge. They understand how that's done. Now, these children
Yeah.
grew up with their mothers now.
That's right.
But they still were more violent
Because the mothers exhibited aggressive behavior toward their
toward them
own
too.
offspring.
That's my life story. Yes.
Okay. Well, now we understand you, Michael.
Yes. Finally.
We got the answer. Finally.
Yes. No, but you only explain the problem.
Yeah.
We have an hour. We're blessed with Dr. Goldman for an
Okay.
hour to get the solution to my life
Okay.
and
So
many of our lives.
it's too late for you, Michael. But
Oh.
if you ever have children, if you have children, see, I'm about prevention.
Yes.
That's why the center is called Early Trauma Prevention.
Oh, so they don't
Yeah.
solve those
we
traumas
don't
have.
treat people that have trauma.
Oh.
We're talking about preventing trauma in the next generation.
Oh,
that's
what a
that's the focus here.
disappointment.
And that's a perspective that gets largely overlooked.
Yes.
That's why I think it's valuable to give it some attention here.
Yes.
Okay, so the new generation of the monkeys now, they became aggressive because they were getting aggressive kind of care from their mother, who was getting aggressive care when the mother was an infant. Okay, so it got passed on to the next generation. And even if the children or the offspring of this mother cried out with wanting to get some loving attention from the mother monkey ignored her children, her offspring. Okay, because again, she didn't have the benefit of having a mother when she was a baby, an infant. So it shows that the neglect and the lack of proper attention from the mother has long-term effects on the infant that grows up, and then if that infant has children, it gets passed on to the next generation, and then the next and the next. Okay, so that's the way that works. Now, researchers also found that there were changes in brain development of these monkeys that had aggressive behaviors. For example, the receptors and pathways that were associated with affection either lacked development or were damaged. Again, these are monkeys that didn't get affection they needed when they were newborn infants and in the early stages of development. So we're talking about biological effects that were affected by adverse experience. So we're saying experience can alter biology. That's the main point for that little piece of information. Okay, so let's move on. Another kind of experiment that relates here is cross-cultural work, cross-cultural studies. And what some of the researchers found is if they looked at different cultures around the world, and they're looking for what behavior in these cultures was a contributing factor to either cultures that could be classified as peaceful or violent. And what they found in 80% of the cultures that were peaceful had this cultural practice that they maintained from generation to generation. And this cultural practice is carrying the infant on the body of the mother throughout the day for the first year of life. So if the cultures did that, 80% of the time they would be peaceful cultures.
Even though that's just often done in Africa, which is a very violent continent.
Well, it depends. Again, I'm talking about global research here, and I'm not saying it's necessarily 100% of the time, but 80% is a pretty strong indication that this cultural practice has a significant effect on contributing to the likelihood
I would
of a
bet I
peaceful
would be
culture.
happier if I would do that, I would imagine.
Excuse me?
I bet I would be happier
Yep.
if I was brought up that way.
Yeah, well, what we're talking here is meeting the needs of infants.
Yes.
Newborn infants have very urgent needs to be with a mother, and certainly being carried on the body of the mother throughout the day for the first year of life is satisfying that need. Okay, so those are some background that contributes to the quality of the bond between the child and the mother. Okay, so this is very, very important. So if this, let's remember now, obviously the child develops within the body of the mother. Okay, so there is communication going on between the fetus and the mother. As the fetus develops, the fetus is exposed to the mother's feelings. Feelings get communicated. If the mother is getting some satisfaction in her life, that's affecting her mood, getting contributed. And of course, the fetus is hearing the mother's voice. And so there's a connection that's being developed even before birth. Okay, so then let's talk about birth. So in birth, what happens in this country is that 99% of births happen in hospitals.
Oh, still?
That's
Wow.
right. That's right. Okay, so birth is a natural process that gets transformed in this country mainly to a medical process. And that's very significant. And throughout the years, primarily it's been male doctors that have been obstetricians that get involved in delivering babies. Okay? And very often in this culture, throughout the years, doctors are trained to take care of things that go wrong. Okay, the focus of their training very often is about doing things. They're not necessarily going to just stand there and observe the birth. They're getting paid pretty good money to participate in some way with this. And so there are drugs that are given the mother during birth. There's technology that is involved in terms of wiring things up and using instruments. And the more interference that's involved with birth, the more likely there is, it contributes to the likelihood of a birth complication.
Wow.
Okay. So we have a very high rate of birth complications in this culture. Let me just give you a very significant example. First, looking back to in 1965, the cesarean rate in this country was 4.5%. Today, 1 out of 3 infants born in an American hospital is born cesarean.
Wow.
That is a huge difference.
Wow.
1 out of 3. Cesarean birth is so unnatural. Okay, we're literally cutting the mother open and literally lifting the baby out of the mother's body. That doesn't follow the design of how babies are supposed to be born. But doctors do these things for a variety of reasons, partly due with their training. Okay, then after an infant is born...
What was that percentage again?
1 out of 3.
Now.
In this country are born cesarean.
And 50 years ago it was just 4%.
4.5%.
Wow. With all this new age.
Huge difference.
New age.
The more technology we have, the more likely it's going to be used to interfere with a natural process. Okay. So after the birth, there are various procedures that are performed on the newborn child. By the way, let me just say a little bit about birth. Very often the umbilical cord is prematurely clamped and cut. So this interferes with the natural connection between the mother and the child through the umbilical cord to allow it to pulsate and live its usefulness, whether it takes a few minutes or whatever. But doctors tend not to take that amount of time. They tend to clamp it and cut it. So that's a disruption. Then the baby is given injections, eye medicine, various testing that goes on. This is all disruptive to an infant who urgently wants to be connected with the mother's body. Okay, so this is, again, part of the birth process. And it's disruptive. And then, let me see if we got another... okay. Do we have a...
Yes.
Here we go.
Oh, just hit it?
Okay. Okay, this is a hospital nursery.
Me, this is where I was born.
Yeah?
How'd you find the hospital?
Now, these aren't as common as they used to be, but there still are hospitals that separate newborn infants from their mothers. And
big possibility of getting the wrong mother.
Well, as you can see, these infants are not with their mothers.
Yeah.
They're here in this nursery, and that is not natural, and it's not satisfying the infant's needs.
They might be sedated. Everyone seems so quiet.
So, again, we're talking about procedures.
And this is still going on now?
It differs from hospital to hospital. Okay? So, hospitals make up their own rules. And another interesting thing about hospital procedures is they're not accountable to anybody in terms of their standard practices. Very often what's done in hospital is ritual. In other words, they tend to do what has been done in the past. They continue doing the same thing. Unless, some very influential doctors and department heads decide that, hey, I think things need to change here. But there's no guarantee that that's going to happen. There's no guarantee that what's done in hospitals is going to conform to what's evidence based.
Oh, so there could be interesting studies there might be of, according to what you're saying now, children that are born in different ways
Yeah,
may be less violent.
that's right.
Although there's other factors, because if you're born in different ways, you're part of a different kind of culture. Your parents would do that.
Let me describe briefly a study that addresses that point, and that is that there was a study that came out in the 90s that got national attention, and what they did was they followed over 4,000 male infants from birth to age 18.
Oh.
Okay, and they found that those infants that had birth complications, and the second factor here was maternal rejection. Okay, those infants that had birth complications and maternal rejection were several times more likely to engage in aggressive or violent behavior by the age of 18.
Well, those are two separate things, though.
I understand. There's two factors, but still,
They have to get both maternal
rejection and birth complications combined to contribute to a greater likelihood of aggressive and violent behavior up to age 18.
Well, with that maternal rejection, I'm sure would do it itself, maybe.
Well, that's not this study.
Yeah, I understand.
Okay, there is another study that showed that 15 of the most violent criminals out of 16, 15 out of 16 of the most violent criminals had extremely complicated births. So there's something based on just the birth factor.
Wow.
15 out of 16 of the most violent criminals had extremely complicated
Wow.
births. So it's a huge signal for us to pay attention to the importance of a peaceful birth.
Yeah.
A natural birth that is not unnecessarily interfered with.
We're going to be making a new world.
Yep.
A happier world.
It starts with birth.
Thanks to Dr. Ron Goldman.
And, you know, there's a couple of other factors here, and that is that in this country, about 45% of pregnancies are unwanted. So that's very significant. In other words, for a large percentage of those, the relationship between the mother and the child is already disrupted because the mother doesn't want the child. Now, some of them are going to have abortions, but a lot of them don't have abortions, and they have their children. And if those children are unwanted, that contributes to a disruption between the relationship between the mother and the child. And of course, that's what?
And to say the least.
Sure.
And then it makes more violent children.
Sure. Okay. Again, we got another contributing factor
You're
here.
explaining all my rage. Thank you.
Yeah.
It's good to know.
So, again, the early experiences of the mother and the child and how they're connected with each other, if they're not, are very influential here in contributing to the potential now. I'm not saying everybody that has these early experiences is going to be violent. It could be a higher proportion.
Yes.
And let's be clear also that most people even in this country, are not violent. So again, if the proportion increases from, like, for example, 5% to 10 or 15%, that's a very significant change in effect. But still, the majority of people who have these early experiences are not going to be violent. They may have other personal and psychological problems, but they're not necessarily going to be violent. So I just wanted to make that clear. Okay.
Good.
So what else can we talk about here? There's birth trauma, and
we haven't talked about birth trauma.
Yeah. Well, trauma can happen when the experience for the infant is so overwhelming that the infant has to somehow protect him or herself psychologically from the experience. So this can involve what psychologists call dissociation.
Oh yes, that's where it began. Huh?
Dissociation or separation psychologically from the experience.
Yes.
And this can involve emotional withdrawal.
Yes.
Okay, and of course, people who are emotionally withdrawn cannot be sensitive to their feelings, because if they were sensitive to their feelings, then they would open up this connection to this early trauma experience,
And it would be too hard to experience it.
which is too overwhelming to experience. So the emotional withdrawal,
And the
the
early trauma
psychological,
again is from the hospitals and the.
yeah, the psychological dissociation is a defense mechanism to protect the person psychologically from this overwhelming trauma. And again, trauma has all kinds of long-term effects, as I'm sure many of us are aware, what we call PTSD, post-traumatic stress disorder. Not to be confused with President Trump stress disorder. Little humor there.
A little great humor. I'm sure we're cracking up the audience.
PTSD, all right.
We have
Okay.
we have about 70 seconds to go for this show.
All
But
right.
if you love this, stay tuned.
We've got a lot more to talk about.
In 4 more minutes, we're going to have part 2 of early trauma prevention.
Yeah, that's what we want to do here.
Yeah.
If we prevent the trauma, we give the child a much better opportunity to have a healthy life, a happy life, and contribute to society, and not get involved with violent behavior.